War has been a relentless force shaping human history for thousands of years, leaving devastation and heartbreak wherever it appears. From the earliest tribal skirmishes fought over scarce resources to the sprawling conflicts that have defined modern geopolitics, war often seems woven into the very fabric of human existence. Yet, what if war is not simply the result of human nature, greed, or politics? What if beneath the surface of this seemingly endless cycle of violence lies a deeper, more sinister influence, one that extends beyond the visible realm into the spiritual? Imagine a force, ancient and hidden, working quietly behind the scenes to ignite and sustain conflict, using humanity as pawns in a cosmic game far larger than we can comprehend. This is not a theory pulled from fantasy or conspiracy alone, but one rooted in the mystical teachings of Gnosticism and other esoteric traditions. These systems of thought propose that our world is not as it appears, that behind the veil of material reality exist entities often described as Archons, or demonic forces. These beings are believed to manipulate human affairs, sowing division, ignorance, and strife to keep souls trapped in cycles of suffering. In particular, there is a demon closely associated with the phenomenon of war, whose influence may explain why humanity seems unable to escape the clutches of conflict, no matter how much we strive for peace. In this video, we will delve into the Gnostic perspective on war and spiritual manipulation. We will explore the origins of this demon of war, its role within the broader cosmic order, and how understanding this hidden force might transform how we view conflict altogether. This is not just a story about politics or power struggles. It's an invitation to see war through a metaphysical lens and question whether the true battlefield exists beyond the physical world. To understand the spiritual forces behind war, we first need to dive into the unique worldview that Gnosticism offers, a worldview sharply different from the familiar stories taught by mainstream religions. Gnosticism presents reality as a dualistic system, divided between the true spiritual realm of light and the false, material world that traps the soul. At the heart of this belief is the idea that the physical universe is not a divine creation of the highest God, but rather a flawed, even malicious construct designed to imprison human consciousness. This false world, according to Gnostic texts, was crafted by an entity known as the Demiurge, a blind, arrogant creator god who mistakenly believes himself to be the highest deity. The Demiurge is not evil in the simplistic sense, but deeply ignorant, and his creation reflects his limitations. The material world, then, is a prison, a cage that holds divine sparks of human souls captive in bodies and matter, forcing them to forget their true origin and purpose. Above the Demiurge in the cosmic hierarchy is the monad, the true, ineffable God, beyond comprehension and form. Alongside the monad exist the Aeons, emanations of divine light representing perfect aspects of being. The Demiurge and his subordinate forces, the Archons, stand in stark opposition to this higher realm. The Archons are spiritual rulers or governors tasked with maintaining the Demiurge's order, enforcing ignorance, confusion, and control over humanity. They act as gatekeepers, ensuring that souls remain trapped within the illusions of the physical world. War, within this framework, is far more than a political or social phenomenon. It becomes a visible manifestation of the spiritual battle raging behind the scenes. The violence, hatred, and chaos that mark human conflicts are reflections of deeper spiritual imbalances and manipulations carried out by the Archons to maintain their dominion. They fuel division and antagonism, preventing humanity from awakening to its divine origin. In this way, war is less about earthly ambitions and more about sustaining the Demiurge's prison, keeping souls locked in suffering and ignorance. Seen from this perspective, every act of violence, every battle, every war is a symptom of a cosmic war far grander than any human conflict. It is the struggle between light and darkness, truth and illusion, freedom and captivity, played out on the battlefield of the human heart and mind, but influenced and orchestrated by invisible forces beyond the veil. Within the Gnostic cosmos, the figure most closely associated with the creation and control of the material world, and by extension the chaos and conflict within it, is known as Yaldabaoth. This entity is often described as the Demiurge, a blind, arrogant, and ignorant god who mistakenly believes himself to be the supreme creator. Unlike the benevolent god of many religious traditions, Yaldabaoth is depicted as a flawed and malevolent force, one whose very nature fosters division, conflict, and spiritual ignorance. Yaldabaoth's role as the architect of the physical universe places him at the center of the Gnostic explanation for why war exists. He is said to rule over the material world with an iron grip, enforcing his dominion through a retinue of subordinate spiritual entities known as Archons. These Archons act as his enforcers, manipulating human thought, emotion, and behavior to maintain control. They are often described as deceitful, chaotic, and destructive, forces that work tirelessly to keep humanity fragmented and distracted. Among these Archons, two names stand out as closely linked with war and strife: Saklas and Samael. Saklas, whose name means fool or blind one, reflects the ignorance and blindness of the Demiurge himself. Samael, often translated as the poison of God or severity of God, is another archonic figure embodying destruction and judgment. These beings are not simply mythological characters, but symbolic representations of spiritual forces that perpetuate violence, fear, and deception in the world. Interestingly, Gnostic thought often merges or parallels these archonic figures with ancient gods of war found in various mythologies. Mars in Roman mythology, or Ares in Greek tradition, the gods of battle, bloodshed, and chaos, can be seen as cultural reflections of the same spiritual archetypes embodied by the Archons. This syncretism reveals how deeply embedded the idea of a war-driving spiritual force is across different civilizations, hinting at a universal recognition of a hidden influence behind humanity's violent tendencies. By identifying Yaldabaoth and his Archons as the true instigators behind war, Gnosticism shifts the conversation from political and economic causes to a metaphysical level. War is not simply about territory, ideology, or resources. It is about control. Control exercised by dark spiritual forces seeking to maintain the imprisonment of human souls within the false material reality. Understanding war as a tool wielded by the Archons reveals a chilling and profound purpose behind human conflict. War is not just a tragic consequence of human failing or geopolitical rivalry. It is an energy source, a mechanism that feeds the very forces keeping humanity enslaved. The Archons thrive on the chaos, fear, and suffering generated by war, because these states of being produce something they desperately seek: spiritual dissociation. When people are caught in the horrors of war, when fear consumes them, when grief overwhelms, and when hatred blinds their minds, there is a fracturing of the soul's connection to its divine origin. This fragmentation creates a kind of spiritual vulnerability, a disconnection from the true self that the Archons exploit. In essence, war creates a psychic environment rich with negative energy, feeding these parasitic entities who manipulate human emotions and keep souls tethered to the material prison. But the manipulation goes even deeper. War serves as a massive distraction, an elaborate ruse designed to prevent humanity from pursuing Gnosis, that is, true knowledge and spiritual awakening. The relentless focus on survival, power struggles, and ideological battles diverts attention from inner reflection and the pursuit of truth. The Archons, through their puppeteering of political systems, social divisions, and cultural narratives, ensure that humans remain trapped in cycles of violence and reaction rather than seeking liberation. Another layer to this dark strategy involves the cycle of death and rebirth. According to Gnostic beliefs, physical death is not an escape, but a return. Souls forced back into the material plane through reincarnation. War, with its mass casualties and trauma, becomes a brutal recycling mechanism, feeding the endless wheel that keeps souls bound to this false reality. Death in battle does not lead to freedom, but perpetuates the cycle of entrapment, drawing more souls back into the Archon's realm of control. This grim vision transforms war from a tragic but natural part of human existence into a calculated spiritual trap. The Archons use conflict to harvest energy, manipulate consciousness, and maintain the illusion that keeps the prison walls intact. Recognizing this allows us to see the battlefield not just in terms of nations and armies, but as a spiritual war over the very essence of human freedom. The idea that war is more than just a physical struggle isn't unique to Gnosticism. Across many spiritual and religious traditions, there's a recurring theme of unseen forces influencing human conflict. Beings that embody evil, chaos, or darkness battling against forces of good and light. These parallels provide a broader context for understanding the Gnostic narrative and highlight a universal recognition of spiritual warfare behind worldly violence. One of the clearest examples comes from Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. Here, the cosmos is understood as a battleground between two eternal forces: Ahura Mazda, the wise and benevolent god of light and order, and Ahriman, the destructive spirit of darkness and chaos. This cosmic dualism echoes the Gnostic division between the true God and the Demiurge with his Archons. Ahriman's influence manifests in lies, suffering, and war, designed to disrupt harmony and prevent humanity from living in accordance with divine truth. The Zoroastrian struggle is not just moral, but cosmic, a metaphysical clash that plays out in the human realm, just like the Gnostic war behind the veil. Christian demonology also contains numerous figures linked to war, destruction, and spiritual corruption. Beings like Asmodeus, Belial, and Moloch are often associated with chaos, human sacrifice, and the darkest aspects of human nature. In some esoteric interpretations, these demons can be seen as extensions or reflections of the archonic forces, operating through the machinery of temptation, division, and violence. The biblical narratives of angelic and demonic battles further emphasize the belief that much of what transpires in the physical world is shaped by unseen spiritual conflicts. Beyond religious doctrines, many occult traditions and modern esoteric philosophies describe chaos as a metaphysical force that corrupts and parasitizes human consciousness. Psychic parasitism, for instance, is a concept where negative entities feed off human emotional turmoil, especially fear and hatred, the very emotions abundant in times of war. This perspective aligns closely with Gnostic teachings about the Archons feeding on the spiritual dissociation caused by conflict. War becomes a kind of spiritual parasite's feast, where collective suffering is not only inevitable, but exploited. These parallels suggest that the concept of spiritual manipulation through conflict resonates across cultures and eras. Whether framed as archons, demons, or cosmic adversaries, the message is consistent. War is not just a matter of earthly power, but a reflection of deeper, unseen spiritual battles. This widespread recognition invites us to reconsider the origins and purpose of conflict from a more expansive and mystical viewpoint. When we examine modern warfare through the lens of Gnostic teachings, the picture of conflict as a spiritual trap becomes even more stark and unsettling. In today's world, war has evolved far beyond the traditional battlefield. It now includes psychological, technological, and systemic dimensions that reflect the Archon's enduring influence in new, sophisticated forms. One of the most potent tools of this modern spiritual manipulation is mass propaganda. Throughout history, controlling the narrative has been essential for mobilizing populations and justifying conflict. But in our era of 24-hour news cycles and social media, propaganda's reach is unprecedented. Nationalism, ideology, fear-mongering, and the constant barrage of information work like a spiritual fog, clouding judgment and deepening division. These psychological tactics keep people emotionally charged, distracted, and obedient to the powers that perpetuate conflict. This manipulation echoes the Archonic strategy of dividing humanity through illusion, pitting group against group, and amplifying fear and hatred to feed on the resulting energy. Technological warfare has added another dimension to this dynamic. The increasing use of drones, cyber attacks, and automated weaponry distances humans from the physical realities of battle. War is becoming more abstract and dehumanized, removing the personal, emotional connection that might otherwise spark resistance or empathy. This detachment mirrors the spiritual dissociation that Gnosticism warns about, where souls are increasingly disconnected from their essence, numbed by the mechanical efficiency of violence. The more impersonal and invisible war becomes, the easier it is for Archonic forces to maintain their hold. Beyond individual tools of control, modern war is deeply entwined with corporate and political interests that operate like modern Archons themselves. Military-industrial complexes, global financial systems, and political elites often perpetuate conflicts for profit, power, and control. These institutions form systemic structures that extend the spiritual dominion of the Archons beyond mere beings into powerful social mechanisms. The very systems designed to maintain order often become instruments of manipulation, reinforcing cycles of violence and preventing genuine peace and awakening. This comprehensive view challenges us to see war not just as a series of unfortunate events or political failures, but as a symptom of a vast, complex spiritual reality. The Archon's influence has adapted to the times, embedding itself within modern structures, technologies, and ideologies to perpetuate the cycle of conflict and keep humanity spiritually captive. If war is a spiritual trap orchestrated by Archonic forces to keep humanity imprisoned within cycles of fear, hatred, and suffering, then the path to liberation lies in awakening, a concept at the very heart of Gnostic teachings. This awakening is called Gnosis, which means knowledge, but not just any knowledge. It is a deep, experiential understanding of the true nature of reality and the self beyond the illusions of the material world. Gnosis is not intellectual trivia or dogma. It is an inner revelation that frees the soul from the deception imposed by the Demiurge and his Archons. Through Gnosis, individuals come to see beyond the veil of conflict and division, recognizing that war and violence are manifestations of spiritual ignorance and control. This awareness is a form of rebellion against the spiritual powers that seek to dominate humanity, a refusal to participate in the games of fear and hatred. Inner peace becomes an act of resistance. When one consciously chooses to reject hatred, division, and violence, even in the face of overwhelming external chaos, it undermines the Archon's power. The spiritual forces that feed on conflict are starved by love, compassion, and truth. This quiet, personal revolution creates cracks in the walls of the material prison, opening pathways for liberation. But awakening is not solely an individual journey. Gnosticism emphasizes communal awakening, a collective rising in consciousness where love, truth, and awareness spread among people, dissolving the illusions that sustain conflict. As more souls awaken and refuse to engage in division, the Archons lose their grip on the world. The cycle of violence weakens and eventually fractures under the weight of a new, unified human spirit. This awakening calls for courage, clarity, and commitment. It asks us to look beyond the surface narratives of politics and power and recognize the spiritual dimension of the struggle we face. It invites us to become warriors of light, not on battlefields defined by guns and armies, but in the realm of consciousness, where true freedom is won. When we step back and reconsider the nature of war through this spiritual perspective, the reality we thought we knew begins to shift. War is not merely a matter of human ambition, ideology, or economic interest. It is something far deeper, an expression of metaphysical forces that seek to control and imprison the human spirit. The endless cycle of violence is a reflection of a cosmic conflict between light and darkness, knowledge and ignorance, freedom and bondage. This understanding challenges us to look beyond headlines, battlefields, and political debates. It urges us to recognize the hidden spiritual dimension beneath every conflict, a dimension where unseen entities manipulate fear, division, and suffering to maintain their dominion. But with this knowledge comes power, the power to resist, to awaken, and to reclaim our freedom. The ultimate question then becomes this: if war is a game played by demons, by Archons using humanity as their pawns, what happens when we stop playing? What if the greatest rebellion is to refuse participation in hatred, division, and violence altogether? To rise above the illusion, to awaken to our true selves, and to choose peace even when the world is engulfed in chaos? The answer is not just a hopeful dream, but a spiritual reality waiting to be realized. War, in all its forms, can lose its hold when enough souls awaken, when enough people remember who they truly are beyond the veil of matter. The battle may rage in the physical world, but the true liberation is won in the heart and mind. This is the path of Gnosis, a path not only of knowledge, but of profound transformation and ultimate freedom.